Welcome back, everyone, to Strange Planet Podcast. And this week's episode is about all the games that are up for Game of the Year. Now, this one's for all the gamers out there as the year is coming to a close. They have narrowed it down to just 6 titles, most of which we will be discussing today. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell icon for notifications. So let's get this started. Rook is going to give you his experience and his review of Allan Wake 2.
Allan Wake 2 is definitely my pick for Game of the Year. And I can say that having beaten Allan Wake 2 and also played a shit ton of Baldur's Gate 3. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think necessarily that Allan Wake 2 is a better game than Baldur's Gate 3. However, I did play over 3 years of the beta of Baldur's Gate 3. And so, the early access. So, right. To me, it's not that new of a title. And they definitely added a lot of stuff in. But Allan Wake 2 just completely blew me away.
No kidding.
So let me talk about that. There's some lead up into the game. Allan Wake 1 was a title that released back in 2013. And it's by the developer Remedy. And they had a number of titles, including the Max Payne series, if everyone remembers that. Yep. And they have Control, which is won Game of the Year. Or did it win Game of the Year?
I know it was up for it, but I don't know if it won that year.
Yeah, no, it definitely was considered. But that game was phenomenal. But Allan Wake 2 just completely just blew me away with both how it tells a story in terms of its narrative and the way it structures its different elements of storytelling. Now, if you look at Allan Wake 1, it was, an action game. There were some horror elements, but Allan Wake 2 is completely different. The gameplay has been refined, but what has really been refined is it takes its theme. It's about a writer who gets the power to change reality, writing his own stories. And they just kick it up to, just an incredible level of just mind-blowing plot twists and character development. So back in 2013, I'm not going to spoil anything, but Allan Wake 1 leaves off on a little bit of a cliffhanger. Allan Wake 2 starts off and you play as this character and you don't know who he is. And you soon discover that it's one of the characters from Allan Wake 1. And so you're like, welcome back into this universe through this other character.
Interesting.
And I thought that was a very interesting way to segue into sort of the dual protagonist narrative of Allan Wake 2. So first you have Allan Wake, of course, but you also have Saga, who she's an FBI agent sent to investigate a series of murders that have been going on in the town that Allan Wake takes place in. And between the two of them, you can switch back and forth after a certain point at any time, and you can pursue the narratives individually. Now, I liked playing as Saga a little bit more, only because I was scared shitless of the dark place that Allan Wake's gameplay takes place in, and it's his story and his environment that he is in is just so scary. Like, I literally jumped
a couple of times
from a lot of things, and even in Saga's story, there are definitely jump scares, but then also this constant foreboding. And they really have, I think, redefined not only the horror genre and the survival horror genre, but also in terms of their storytelling, they just completely blew my mind in ways that I haven't experienced since Nier Automata, which for everyone that has never played that game, if you do anything, please play that game before you die. That is a love letter to video games.
It was amazing. I remember that too.
But Alan Wake 2, I think an evolution of storytelling in a very different way than Nier Automata, but it has, I think, an equal impact in terms of pushing the genre forward. You'll go through it there's like Inception level sort of narrative elements in it, and it actually I think puts Inception to shame in terms of the sort of mysteries inside of mysteries inside of mysteries, I'll just say. And it just keeps you guessing, and it keeps you playing until the very end. And so
mind-bending
if there's one game that I'd recommend this year that's not Baldur's Gate 3, I would say Alan Wake 2.
Yeah, I played the first one actually fairly recently too, so I would expect that, especially it's getting a lot of hype. But like the first one I thought was actually, considering how old it is, I was impressed. Of course, I think the one I had was a remastered or something like that, but
right,
it was really good. So like I was pretty impressed with it. So I would assume, especially by the way you're talking, that this is more than just a step forward for that series.
Like even if you play Control, this is just, I think, a big leap forward for video games and video game storytelling. And like I said, it rivals Inception, and in some ways it surpasses it in terms of its narrative complexity, but also in a way that makes sense. And it just perfectly intertwines dual protagonists in a way that I have not seen in any game since maybe Nier Automata.
One thing I'd like to keep a note of, I don't know if the second one does this, unfortunately, because I haven't played it yet. But the first one, I think besides maybe one other game, out of all the games I've played in my entire life, this one, and there was another one, I think it was a Resident Evil, but I forget which one it was the first time ever I've ever seen a game do it previously, like a TV show. So that kind of threw me under the loop. I was like, wow, this is like, you don't see that. You know what I mean? I was like, wow, that's some shit.
That was a pretty great gimmick in the first game. They actually don't do that in the second game.
Oh, they don't?
No. But they do a lot of things that are sort of callbacks to the original. But trust me, the way they do the narrative in this game will make you forget all about Alan Wake 1.
I would assume
they do it so much better. And there's one part in the game that literally had me smiling for like 15 minutes straight, because I was like, wow, I can't believe they did this. And I was just completely blown away by the thought that the developers put into this game. And they were thinking about the people playing it as this gameplay and as this story unfolds before you could sort of see the developers like put their stamp on the game in like a fourth wall breaking way. That's all I'll say.
No kidding, guys. We're not going to say too much. We don't want to give spoilers here for those that haven't played it. But we are going to give you
but just to give you a sense of how wonderfully weird this game is, one of the lead developers of the game is a guy named Sam Lake. And he plays a character in the game, or he plays two characters in the game. He plays Alex Casey, who is an FBI agent who's Saga's partner, which mysteriously is also the name of Alan Wake's character in the novel that Alan Wake writes, his novel series. So it's a very interesting dynamic, and that's all I'll say about that. But there is definitely some Inception level shit that goes down in that game, and people need to play this.
Yeah, and it's got lots of jump scares too, right?
They do the jump scares in a really dynamic way, so you don't really expect them. But let me just point out, it's not just jump scares. There's also this just foreboding like tone where you're just always looking over your shoulder and scared that something's going to just pop out at you and like so they do a good job of doing the jump scares, but then you're always like looking around the corner for one, and
You're on guard.
you
You're
just
like,
never know where danger's lurking in that game, and it even more so in Alan Wake's story, but still in Saga's story too. You have a little bit more comfort in terms of, well, you know, I don't expect these necessarily otherworldly beings to just like turn on you because, in Alan Wake's gameplay, there are literally these shadow like creatures, and some of them are hostile to you, but most of them will just leave you alone. And then some of them will start walking up to you, whispering Alan Wake. And there's just like, you're pointing your gun at them, and ammo is scarce in this game. And so you don't really want to waste like your flashlight battery, which can allow you to reveal or attack enemies and make them vulnerable to bullets, or you don't know whether to waste your resources on them. So it's always a gamble when you see these shadows, and you just have to make a decision, because if you wait too long, they'll come up and start attacking you, and then you'll have to waste your health resources. So I felt like the gameplay in Alan Wake's side was very clever in doing that, but it's very different from the experience you get with Saga, which is more traditional in that sense. But then she also has an interesting power of her own, but I won't get into that because I don't want to do story spoilers.
yeah, that makes sense. We don't want to say too much at the same time, but it sounds like they did add quite a bit, especially compared to the first one.
Indeed.
Yeah, and like the combat system too. I mean, like I said, I didn't mess with the second one just yet, but with the first one there, I remember it was very unique with that flashlight concept and stuff, and like you didn't really see that in really any other title. It makes this one very standalone in that sense.
Right. So it's an interesting dynamic because you have to shine your flashlight on most enemies in order to have them manifest into the real world, in order for them not to be sort of like ghosts, and they're weak to light. So if you shine your flashlight on them, then they're vulnerable to bullets. But that whole dynamic that could have been done in a really annoying way, but it actually makes the game unique, and they challenge you to, and they make it easier even in Alan Wake 2 to switch between your flashlight and your gun, and it works a little bit differently in Alan Wake 2. But I think the choice they made in terms of forcing you to conserve your resources, your flashlight resources, could, because you can't even make an enemy vulnerable until, I mean, unless you have a battery in your flashlight. And then there's also environmental puzzles that also use your flashlight. So you want to be conserving and make tough choices. And I think they did a really good job of that.
How do you feel about it winning?
So I think it has, out of all the games nominated, I feel like it has maybe not an equal chance with Baldur's Gate 3. I think it definitely deserves to be considered. And personally, that's the game that has excited me most this year, because again, I've played Baldur's Gate 3 for 3 years now. And although, they did add a lot to the game since the early access, I kind of had a good sense of what that was. And so it doesn't feel as new to me as Alan Wake. Don't get me wrong, Baldur's Gate 3 is fucking amazing and groundbreaking in its own right.
I believe
But
that.
I saw a lot of that groundbreaking gameplay, over the last 3 years. And so I think, I would say Alan Wake has a good maybe 30% chance of winning, whereas Baldur's Gate, I think, well over 50%
I
chance of
agree.
winning. in any other year, but the release of a Zelda game, I feel like Alan Wake 2 and Baldur's Gate 3 would be just like shoo-ins. Of course. But if you have a Zelda game releasing in a year, you know, good luck.
Yeah,
So
seriously.
why don't we actually kick it to Mark and have him talk about his experiences?
Yeah, he's very familiar with, I believe, the Zelda title, Tears of the Kingdom or something, I think it was called.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's the Super Mario Wonder, apparently. They're both up.
Well, I'll start with the Zelda game first. If anyone's played Breath of the Wild, it has a pretty much identical interface with it when you're dealing with combat and when you're dealing with like cooking and traversing the land. The major things that they did is they added a third dimension to it where you're not only discovering the map of the regular floor plan of the whole kingdom and everything, you're also discovering the sky areas above it. You're also discovering the underground below the kingdom itself. So there's essentially three full world maps to look through when you're trying to find the next temple to go to gain some points to upgrade your stats, and it does fall on the same tropes where you have to find the armor in order to be in the lava area, which resists fire, and the other armor that resists the heat from the sun, and the other armor that resists the cold when you're in the cold areas. I mean, it still feels as open as it did in Breath of the Wild, but they've expanded upon it. So I do believe that this is going to have that new element where it will bring it to the next level of the game. But essentially, it is another. It's Breath of the Wild too. It's it's just Tears of the Kingdom. They don't number games anymore when they do sequels. But it's still a great game. It's still fun as hell. I haven't finished it because there's a ton of content in it, from discovering the upper levels, the lower levels, and just some of the traversing through the areas. The elements in the first game is you would combine some things to make like little areas to walk on. In the new one, you can combine things to make a flying machine or a little truck to start going over the land with. I mean, it's clunky, but it works, and it's just a whole different element to the game. It doesn't feel like the original Legend of Zelda games where you have Link just walk around with a sword shooting it. I mean, it does kind of take the three-dimensional game of Ocarina of Time, yeah, where it takes an open world kind of map and the three-dimensional dungeon exploring, and it flips it on its ear. I mean, it's not your traditional dungeon exploring like in Ocarina of Time. It feels a little more open, as if the difference between going to a mall where everything's in one building and going to a mall that has everything outside.
Okay.
But anyway, I digress. I mean, again, you can always try to defeat Ganon from the get go, because you just have to try to be able to walk through everything, but it's going to be almost near impossible without upgrading anything. So that's where
Right.
it comes in. You're out questing, gaining more power, gaining more health. And when you feel you're powerful enough, you have the right weapons, you come back and you try to beat Ganon, and game over.
It almost seems like, from what I'm hearing here, because I haven't played this, like they kind of infused a little bit of like the Elden Ring concept. Because, like you said, you could go up and try to fight Ganon early, but you're probably not going to win. And like situations like that, you could do an Elden Ring. You know what I mean?
Well, that was the case in the first one too, Breath of the Wild. You could go straight to Ganon and try to beat him. Good luck beating him, though.
Right. Yeah.
It was. I mean, there are speedrunners who would time freeze trees and whack them, and then fly like 15 miles across the map and get into areas that you couldn't normally get to. It's really interesting what people can do with games like this. But I mean, it's a fun game. It doesn't quite have the atmospheric element like Alan Wake 2 does and Alan Wake did. So it's definitely doesn't have that effect on people. But I definitely think this could be a front runner to win. I mean, you're dealing with Zelda. It's a title that's been living on for eons. So it's going to have that kind of monarch to it where you know people look at it, but well, it's Zelda, and it's a good game. Allan Wake 2 is not quite as big a franchise, but it seems like it's taking it into a good direction.
Right. When it's also a point where Zelda's a little bit more kid friendly, whereas Allan Wake and like Baldur's Gate are a little bit for more probably mature audiences. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, no, Alan Wake. Let's just say within the first 15 minutes of the game, you see a dick. All right, it's not a kid's game at all.
I was not expecting that.
I'll say this though, getting back to the Nintendo side and talking about Mario games before I transition, there is a game that does have a light mechanic that you make ghosts vulnerable to your other weapon, and that is Luigi's Mansion. I don't know if you guys have ever played Luigi's Mansion.
Oh,
that's kind of
right.
true. Yeah,
I
you're
have
right.
actually played that. That is
Game.
that is a good
That's a
callback.
Yeah.
I never
But
thought of
there's
that. That's true.
transitioning into the Mario Wonder game, and I don't think Mario Wonder is going to win, only because that I feel there are a few disappointing elements to the new game. Otherwise, it's an excellent Mario game. It's another, winner up there with the ones that have been put out in the past. There are, a couple in the past, but we won't talk about those. So, when you think Mario game, what do you guys think about it? You think about like the difficulty of the levels, the power ups you get as you're playing the game.
Yeah, I mean, I just think of a fun platformer that has nice different challenges to it, and it's just a very fun casual game.
More relaxed, probably. You know what I mean? But still can be tedious at points,
All right. So I'll say this then. On that note, this game delivers tenfold. It is a fun, casual kind of game at the start. Later on, it starts getting more difficult, and I'll get into more detail in a minute. But with the game, I feel it disappoints in the fact that you don't get as many powers as you do in like Mario 3. Mario 3 had a ton of different powers you could have: the Tanuki suit, Fire Flower, the leaf, the Hammer Brothers suit. There were tons of stuff you could do. Here, there's four. There's four main ones. They bring back the Fire Flower. They bring back, they don't bring back, but they bring an Ice Flower, a drill, and you can become an elephant, which is
Wow, an
elephant.
That's they definitely have some random powers in Mario games.
That's true. He was a statue in one years ago. So an elephant, I guess, yeah, they're really shaking things up a little.
As for the fun of the game, it's not well, it's traditional in that the Mario, you know what to expect from the level itself. It does do a couple things that add a level of spice to it, where you'll have levels where you'll go down a pipe and you end up in the background of the level where you see Mario behind everything and he's jumping in a part of that level, collecting coins and battling whatever beasties you find. And even somewhere he's in the foreground in front of everything. So that adds that little depth into it. They don't play too much on it where they overdo it, but here and there they touch on that. But on every level, there is a flower that you end up collecting that's kind of changes the level in a trippy way per se. Like there'll be one where you're playing a level and it's in the dark, and you get this flower, and Mario all of a sudden stretches long, where he's like 6 feet tall, but just really thin, same thinness. And you crouch down, and the whole level crouches down with him, and you let go, and everything goes back up. And that's just one aspect. There's one where he turns into a Goomba, where you walk around as a Goomba, which is interesting.
That's
one
pretty funny.
Into a spiky ball, where you run around as a spiky ball. There's one where you turn into a slime, where you can stick to the ceilings and walls and everything. It definitely adds some new elements of play. Let's make the game fun. It does play a bit on the musical side of the game,
That's pretty cool.
where you will find some levels that will sing to you. For instance, there is a level where King Boo sings opera. It's kind of wacky, but it's fun. But as with all Mario games, things come with some challenge. So as you get towards the later levels, things get difficult. And as with every Mario game since World, there is a magical star level, which is after you collect everything and you get all the special stages, you get to harder stages just for collecting new stuff. And these levels really tax you. There is one. Oh, there's a new element also I have to bring up where they have badges you get from different stages you're going through, and these badges give you a secondary power per se.
Oh,
Now, if
shit.
you remember playing Mario 2, Mario had the ability to crouch down where he glowed, then he could jump higher.
Right, right.
That is a power you can end up getting as a badge.
That's
There
kind
is,
of cool. Talk about a throwback.
yeah. Now, if you remember Peach in Mario 2, she had the ability to float for a few seconds and then she could fall.
Right, right.
That you get that power for everybody as well. You can play as Peach, Daisy, Mario, Luigi, Toad, Yoshi, the Mouse Bandit from the new Mario World games that were for the Wii and Wii U.
No kidding.
That
So there's options too.
yeah, there is options, and if you play as Yoshi or Nabbit, you take no damage really, but you don't get to collect the power ups to turn into like Fire Yoshi or Fire Nabbit. Those are just null and void for you. It's just
Right, right.
a game for like speed running or whatever.
Ah,
So there's all these throwback powers from previous Mario games that they make into badges. They add a few new ones for flavor, a few other things to add. Extra coins. Always start the level as Super Mario, and one of the last levels is a culmination of not all the badges, but all the active power badges you could do as a secondary power. And you have to do them one by one by one. You get one mushroom to start the whole level, and that's it. It becomes an endurance round after that.
no kidding.
So
Let me ask you this then. As far as the two there you played, the Zelda one and this Mario one, do you think either of those stand to be the winner of the game of the year?
the one thing about the Zelda game is it felt overwhelming with as much that you could do and like explore. Like even Breath of the Wild itself was overwhelming with how many shrines you had to go to, collect things to become all maxed out. That's why you could go and defeat Ganon whenever you felt like it. Okay, I'm done trying to max out. Let's go beat the last boss now. So it feels even more exhausting in the new game. So I kind of put that down after a while. It didn't keep me coming back for more.
Interesting.
Whereas Mario game was so fun, I kept coming back for more, even though it's just a Mario game, but it was fun. I wanted to see what new things they popped up with what new level I would have to deal with that would either be frustrating or just and fun in general.
So you're leaning more towards the Mario one probably then. The Mario Wonder probably over the Zelda then.
If one of the ones are going to win from Nintendo, I think the Mario one would win.
No kidding. Wow.
The level of fun from the game was just worth your money there.
How about that?
Yeah, we still haven't heard from one important title, and that is Resident Evil 4.
Indeed.
Gee, what did you think about that game?
Because
I played a little of it, but you obviously beat both the original and the sequel or the remake. So tell us about it.
Yes. Actually, to tell you the truth, I could probably talk for an hour on this, but we're not going to do that. But if anyone remembers the old version that was originally a GameCube release, an exclusive release, which was strange at the time too, considering a lot of them weren't even on that console. But I was hooked on that game for like years. That game was incredible. So when I found out they were making a new one that was a remake of that, I instantly knew that it was going to be gold. And they delivered, to be honest. There was, there's always pros and cons to everything. But overall, they did a phenomenal job with it. They added a lot of things that weren't in the original while taking out a few things that weren't necessary, I guess. But they also, I'm not going to say too much too, because I don't want to ruin it for people that haven't messed with it yet. But there is a couple of things that were taken, like not many, like maybe two things to be exact, that were taken out that I almost felt like they could have left in. But I'm not going to talk too much on that. But as far as like the gameplay goes, and as far as even just the game in general, they like knocked it out of the park. Because they added like a melee kind of combat system that wasn't really in the first one at all. They even added like like side quests that the merchant guy that you keep running into time to time that he issues. Most of them were, not really that big of a challenge, but I think the thing that they get you with is your memory. Because when they issue these things, it's up to you to remember to do them. And then if you progress too far into the story, you can't go back. So then they're just gone. You know what I mean? You have to hope you have an extra save or something, or on your second playthrough, you could probably always do it too. But that was also a pretty cool concept. I thought that, added a little something extra that wasn't there before. You know what I mean? And but as far as the regular game itself goes, especially for those that are returning that played the original one on GameCube, you will not be disappointed. They definitely paid more than homage to the original while adding even more to it. And you would think how, but they figured out a way to do it, and they really killed it. Do I think it's going to be Game of the Year? I don't know. I think I feel like it pulls its weight, and it could, but I just feel like overall, and it's funny because I haven't even played it really, but I feel like Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be the winner in the end. But as far as Resident Evil 4 goes, they also added kind of a different, I guess the best way I could word it is there was this kind of timed combat system that's similar to God of War in a sense, where if you're in a knife fight or something, rather than just button mashing or something like that, you had to wait until a specific button were to pop on screen. And then you had to hit that, and then you had to, pay attention for the next move while they're going at it. And then you had to, press a different button or whatever command that popped up on the screen. They kind of did away with that. And I look at that as a good thing, really, because it was kind of a nuisance in the first one a little bit. You know what I mean? But it did add a challenge at the same time, because you never knew what command it was going to throw at you. And if you were too late, usually that was it. And then you had to start over. But they added something else instead besides that. And that was really cool. And I don't want to talk too much on it because I don't want to spoil that part either, because I'd rather people also be kind of surprised by this than, than otherwise. But they also, even a lot of the bosses that were the main bosses that you had to fight in the original to this one, they're, obviously the same because it's a remake, but the actual combat system for some of them are entirely different. And that's one thing I thought was very unique. So you kind of walked into it thinking it's all right, well, this is going to go, you would think the same way it did before. No, they completely changed a lot of that. And that was kind of cool. And it was also a throw off because you're over here kind of with your expectations that you had from the previous version. You know what I mean? And then now you're face to face with the same thing, but it's an entirely new setup. You know what I mean? Entirely new fight scene, sequence, and everything. You know what I mean? They definitely did a very good job with that. And keeping the whole horror theme alive. And of course, graphically, the remake is incomparable to the old one. Not that the old one was bad, but this one is definitely a big improvement. And that merchant that I brought up earlier, you can't really have a Resident Evil 4 game without the merchant. He's probably one of my favorite characters in the game. And in the remake, not only is he, operate basically the same way as he did in the original one, but he also is the one that issues all the side quests as well, which of course are optional. You don't have to do those, although I would recommend you do because usually the payout is worth it. But the best thing about this, and this is also very similar to the original, is this is a blasting kind of game. It's not one of those games where it's survival where you have to run. This is kind of the thing where you can run if you so choose, technically, but you don't have to. Ammo is a little bit more scarce in this than it was in the original version, but it's still, if you don't miss and you're pretty, conservative with your shots, you should have enough to get through and, blast your way kind of through the whole thing, which is kind of fun because when you see a horde coming at you, sometimes you don't want to run. You want to sit there and take out that whole crowd, So you have that as technically an option still. You could choose to run and move on, or you can just, get your arsenal ready and then get ready for warfare. And speaking of the warfare, most of the weapons are generally the same, but they did add a few new ones as well. And similar to the original, the remake has plenty of replay value. So it's very similar to the first one. After you finish it, you could always restart the whole thing with everything you currently had when you finished it. And then on top of that, the remake actually also delivers like a store. It has its own like challenge system in game, and each of these challenges are worth X amount of points, say, and then you could exchange those points for like weapons and skins and even concept art and models, and the list goes on. So all in all, I would definitely say Resident Evil 4 Remake is one of the best games I probably played this year, as they did add a ton of new content to the base game. They added to the mercenary mode and the Ada story that was attached shortly later, which was also entirely redone, and they added a bunch of new things into that as well. And that was also a cool addition because it gave you a different perspective from someone else on the same, story of what was going on. And I guess the only other thing I would add is if you hadn't played the original but had played the remake, I would almost recommend giving the original one a run through so you could make your own comparisons and see not only how much new content they added to the remake, but you might even see a couple of things that they seemingly intentionally left out that are only in the original. Now, obviously, the Resident Evil 4 remake is 10 times better than the original, but there is a few small little things that the original one has that wasn't carried over to the new one. So by going back and checking that out, you'd be able to experience that for yourself and I guess draw your own conclusions. You know what I mean?
I hear you.
Yeah,
like-
I mean, I don't think I would go back and play the original. However, I definitely will finish the new one after hearing you talk about it.
Yeah, it's 100% worth it. And like I said, even if you didn't play that one, it's definitely you're gonna enjoy it. And there is some possible pop-up scares that might get you and stuff too, but they changed the game for the better in the long run. And like you said, like I doubt a lot of people probably would go back and mess with the first one with this one here now, you know what I mean? But if you were to, it's not, very cost effective. It's probably less than $10 at this point. But after you were to say complete the new remake, I would also say if you had time, give it a go. You know what I mean? Give that a shot too. And then you can see for yourself exactly what they changed and how they changed it. You know what I mean? And then you never know. Some people might have actually liked that like kind of God of War time-based sequence with the melee attacks and stuff.
You mean those quick time events?
Yeah, I guess that's probably the better way to word it. You know what I mean? They have that. They had I'm not going to say a lot of that in the first one, but there was a good maybe 5 or 6 times throughout the whole game where you're gonna have to deal with that.
Well, you know what game actually has quick time events, and they do it fairly well. They're infrequent, and this game actually is not nominated for Game of the Year.
Okay.
Although it's a really good game, but it came out in a year of very good games. Final Fantasy 16. It's definitely I'd say maybe about halfway through it. And yeah, there are some quick time events in between action, but they do it in a really helpful way where it gives you a pause from the action and kind of just makes the moment a little more dramatic. It's not done to have you button mashing or anything like that. It's done to sort of make you feel powerful or that you're changing the dynamic of a fight. And it's a relatively easy way to do it, but I don't think it, like a lot of QuickTime games, like try to test your timing. No, this doesn't do that. It just asks you to pay attention, every once in a while, and then gives you sort of this dramatic payoff in terms of cinematics.
No kidding. That was another one that I guess is a little too new, but Yeah, I'm surprised that wasn't on the list because those are usually never a bad decision. Any one of those. I think the
Yeah,
last
I
one I
mean,
messed with was
Final
15,
Final
and that was
Fantasy.
great.
Yeah, no, Final Fantasy 16 got really good ratings, a lot of nines, but it actually was pretty controversial because it completely changed Final Fantasy into an action game, and so like on the same level as like Devil May Cry almost. So that shift from a party based RPG to one in which you're playing with mostly one party member. Sometimes one or two others might join you, but you can't switch to them. You can't really order them to attack. Everything is focused around the main character, Clive. They do a really good job of it, and the story still stands up to Final Fantasy. And it's actually, a very dark and mature story. However, a lot of people did not sort of like that it moved even further away from its turn-based roots and further away from a party-based RPG. But it's still a great Final Fantasy, and I'd say it's better than 15. 15, I think, tried to build out a world that was like fleshed out and had all this background in it, and they did that, but they didn't show it in game. They had a movie with a huge big budget cast. They had people from Game of Thrones and Aaron Paul from Breaking Bad.
Yeah, there was a big cast in that. It's true.
Yeah, yeah. They had Cersei, the actress who plays Cersei from Game of Thrones. They had Sean Bean, who plays Ned Stark from Game of Thrones.
Right.
They had a huge cast, and it was a really good movie and did a lot of world building. But then when you got in game, they did nothing really with the world that they built, and a lot of things happened off screen. You could tell, like, they just papered over some things. Final Fantasy 16 doesn't do that. It really cares about its lore, and it shows you it in game. And even if you have to like read in an encyclopedia or something in game, they make sure that information is there if you want it. But also they present a lot of it within the narrative and within the story, and you really feel like you're in this gigantic Game of Thrones type world.
Yeah, that's the theme I saw from even just the trailer. It's got a very Game of Thrones like vibe to it. And that's not necessarily uncommon for that franchise, but at the same time, I was like, that's kind of a cool twist, especially compared to 15, which was nothing like that. You know what I mean? So that's pretty cool too. But one thing I'm going to also bring up, going back to Baldur's Gate 3, and the reason why I think it's probably going to win. The same studio that made that game, I'm pretty sure, was the same studio that made Divinity Original Sin, right?
Yes, Larian Studios.
That right there is probably one of my favorite games I think I've ever played, with Resident Evil 4 in the same boat. You know what I mean? As different as they are.
The same thing that I said about Allan Wake 2 evolving from Allan Wake 1. That's also what I say from Baldur's Gate 3 from Divinity 2. There are similarities, but the ways in which they evolve the genre are going to blow your mind when you play it.
I'm sure, and that's what I'm expecting, to be honest, because I saw clips and I saw, the trailer and stuff, and it does look a lot like Divinity, but like Divinity 2 on steroids.
Yeah, there's just so much, not just so much content, but so many choices, but not in a way that, I mean, obviously when you first start the game, you kind of feel overwhelmed, and there's just a lot of mechanics to get down, but it really immerses you into that world, and it makes you feel like the learning curve is worth it, because it does pay off in terms of all the choices, not just combat choices, but character interaction choices. And I can't wait to play this game with like a party, because I played it solo, and it's really good solo. Don't get me wrong, but
Right.
I think that game is meant to be played with a group of people, and it's based off of Dungeons and Dragons, so it's meant to be played with other people. And I just think that if Baldur's Gate 3 wins this year, I will not be surprised, and it is well deserved. The only reason that I would give the nod to Allan Wake 2 is because Baldur's Gate 3 isn't necessarily new to me after 3 years of early access. It's not completely new to me. There are some things that I've experienced thus far in the game that have completely blown me away, but I was already familiar with the general systems and what was being presented, and the depth of what was being presented. And so, while I'm kind of used to that, again, Allan Wake 2, coming from playing Allan Wake 1 is just a gigantic leap forward for that genre of gaming.
Yeah, and the funny thing is Baldur's Gate 3, I haven't even played it, like I said before, but I just, it's one of those things you just know. You know what I mean? Like, I know whenever the hell it decides to come to consoles, probably when I'm going to end up picking it up. But
it is on console, just PlayStation though.
Right.
They are working on it for Xbox, but they said it was going to be coming out by the end of the year, but time's a ticking.
Yeah, we're getting close. That's a good point. But like, I was always a big fan, even when I was younger too, of turn-based games, because it adds, a whole new strategy to the whole gameplay. It's like chess, not checkers kind of concept, And Divinity was a grand slam with that. You know what I mean? So, like you said, if this Baldur's Gate 3 is basically Divinity 2 on steroids, that's enough for me to know that it's probably not only 100% worth it, but a valid winner of the game of the year, I think, in the end. Because, like, all these titles are great. Don't get me wrong. I don't think any of these games, if you were to get any of these, you're going to be disappointed. But as far as, like, the best one with the most complexities and the most strategy involved, out of all of them there, I would say Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be the winner for that.
And I'd agree, and I wouldn't blame, there's nothing wrong with that pick. That's I would say that for the majority of people, that is going to be their game of the year.
Right?
If
and
they
I'm a huge
Resident
Evil fan. And I'm a huge Resident Evil 4 fan. You know what I mean? So it kind of hurts me to say that, because I would rather say that deserves it. But when you put a game like Baldur's Gate in front of it, I don't know. You know what I mean? I kind of feel like Baldur's Gate's going to take the cake on that one in the end. Because, like I said, Resident Evil 4 was one of the best games I probably played this year, too. And the even the DLC they released later on was, like, basically the original on steroids. Like, they added more to it. It seemed longer. Now, I don't know if it actually was, but it definitely seemed longer, which was good, because it made it kind of, last longer. It wasn't something you felt like you beat in a day or two. But I just don't know if it's going to be strong enough to take out Baldur's Gate 3. You know what I mean? I don't think it's going to. And that's our show for this week. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. Strange Planet will have new episodes on YouTube every Friday. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.